There is new Ring camera video in the search for Nancy Guthrie, now nearly 1 month since the mother of Today Show's Savannah Guthrie disappeared. The new video shows a car driving near her house around the time that she was taken. NBC's Liz Kreitz is in Tucson with the details.
An 84-year-old woman had dinner with her daughter on a Saturday night. Her son-in-law drove her home. He says he watched her walk through the garage door, the door sealed behind her. And then, for the next 14 hours and 13 minutes, nobody called, nobody texted, nobody drove the 4 miles back to check on her. The first person to notice something was wrong was not a family member. It was a woman from her church who noticed an empty chair on a Sunday morning live stream. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st, 2026. She is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker. She takes medication every night at 10 p.m. that the sheriff himself said could be fatal to skip. She removes her hearing aids before bed and becomes completely deaf to everything around her. She lives alone. She had no working security cameras, no alarm system, no medical alert pendant, no caretaker, and somebody knew all of that. Before we go further, if this kind of deep coverage matters to you, subscribe and leave a comment below. It keeps this channel going. Now let us get into it. This case has generated thousands of tips, an FBI reward of over $1 million, surveillance footage of a masked armed intruder, ransom notes demanding millions in Bitcoin, and a 911 call that Arizona law enforcement has refused to release to the public for over 3 months. 3 months, in a state where 911 recordings are public records, a recording that a retired detective says will not surface until a trial date is set. Let that sit for a second. A trial date. That is not the language of a cold case. That is the language of a case being built. So let us build it from the beginning, not from the night she disappeared, from the months before. Because when you look at what was happening around Nancy Guthrie before February 1st, the abduction stops looking random. It starts looking like the final move in a sequence that had been in motion for a long time. Nancy Ellen Guthrie was born January 27, 1942. She has lived in the Tucson area for more than 5 decades. She raised 3 children largely on her own after her husband Charles died at 49 during a mining exploration trip in Mexico in 1988. Her eldest daughter is Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC. Her second daughter is Annie Guthrie, who lives about 4 miles from Nancy in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson with her husband Tommaso. Her son is Cameron. By every account, Nancy was sharp, independent, and deeply rooted in her community. She attended church virtually every Sunday morning with friends. She managed her own home. She was not a woman who needed to be watched over. She was a woman who had built a life and intended to keep living it. Her home in the Catalina foothills is valued at roughly $1 million, public record. It sits in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the greater Tucson area. She had owned it for decades. 4 miles away, Annie and Tommaso own a home valued at approximately $650,000. A $350,000 gap between the mother's property and the daughter's. On its own, that means nothing. But when you are trying to understand why someone would plan and execute an operation this sophisticated against a woman in her 80s while she slept, the value of what she owned becomes a relevant data point. Because the most common motive in cases where an elderly person is harmed by someone inside their own circle is not rage. It is not a crime of passion. It is access to assets that become available once the owner is no longer present. Now here is where the financial thread begins. In May of 2025, 8 months before Nancy disappeared, an unverified document circulated online showing that Tommaso signed a durable power of attorney naming Annie as his agent over financial and property matters. People with legal backgrounds were quick to say this is standard. It is the kind of document that gets signed during a mortgage refinance or a property closing. And maybe that is exactly what it was. But the timing places it in a sequence. And that sequence has a direction. May 2025, power of attorney signed, sometime before January 31st, 2026. According to a claim published online by an investigative reporter who had been tracking the case on the ground in Tucson, Annie Guthrie asked her mother for a loan. The amount is not known. The reason is not known. Nancy said no. That claim has not been confirmed by law enforcement. It has not been denied by the family. It has not been addressed publicly. But it landed in the middle of a case where the financial questions had already been accumulating for months. And it gave those questions a starting point they did not have before. January 31st, 5:32 p.m. Nancy requested an Uber from her home and was taken to Annie and Tommaso's house for dinner. That ride is fully documented. Timestamps, in-car footage, a driver who cooperated completely with investigators. Everything about the trip to Annie's house is on the record. The trip home is not. Nancy did not call an Uber to get back. Tommaso drove her. He decided when they left. He chose the route. He is the only person whose account of that ride exists. He says he walked her to the garage, watched her go inside, waited for the door to seal behind her, and then left. No camera recorded the arrival. No neighbor witnessed it. No app generated a timestamp. The only version of those final moments before Nancy's disappearance comes from the last known person to see her. And after he drove away, nobody called. Not that night. Not that morning. 14 hours and 13 minutes of total silence from the people who live 4 miles away and who had just spent an evening with a woman they knew would be alone, deaf to the world, and dependent on medication she needed to take before bed. In families where a parent is aging alone, the goodnight call is automatic. The morning check-in is routine. A 3-second text costs nothing and exists because people care. That ritual was absent on the night of January 31st, and its absence created a clean operational window. No interruption, no unexpected visit, no phone call that might have been answered by someone other than Nancy. Just 14 uninterrupted hours where the only person who noticed something was wrong was a woman who saw an empty chair on a church livestream. Now look at what was happening inside that window. At 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera at Nancy's home was disconnected, not by a technical glitch. Someone physically interfered with it. The FBI later released footage showing a masked individual on the porch, wearing dark gloves and a backpack, holding a flashlight in his mouth, tilting the camera with his hand, covering the lens with foliage from a potted plant. When he could not fully disable the device, he worked around it. Investigators later confirmed the camera's data had been successfully recovered, which is how that footage exists at all. Think about that level of preparation. This person knew the camera was there. He knew where it was positioned. He had a plan for disabling it, and when that plan did not fully work, he adapted. That is not someone who showed up randomly. That is someone who had been to that porch before. At 2:12 a.m., one of the home's cameras detected motion classified as a person. No video was captured. Something or someone moved through that house in the dark and left no image. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected from the app on her phone. She had been moved beyond Bluetooth range of the nightstand where the phone was left behind. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy Guthrie was no longer inside her own home. Her phone was still there. Her purse was still there. Her hearing aids were out. Her medication was sitting on the counter untouched. The back doors of the house were found propped open, and on the front porch, investigators found blood. It was confirmed to be Nancy's. The sheriff said there has been no sign of life, but he also said there has been no sign of death. Now let us talk about what the investigation has and has not done, because the gap between those two things is where this case gets interesting. The initial response to Nancy's disappearance was described by a Pima County Sheriff's Department sergeant, speaking to News Nation, as a disorganized mess. His exact words were a quote, "S show," end quote. Detectives were not communicating with each other about which witnesses they had already spoken to. The FBI and the Sheriff's Department were not sharing information properly. Evidence processing became a point of open conflict. FBI Director Kash Patel publicly stated that local authorities had tried to keep the FBI out of the investigation, particularly around DNA testing. A sitting member of the Pima County Board of Supervisors publicly accused Sheriff Chris Nano of letting a personal grudge against the Bureau interfere with a federal investigation into the abduction of an 84-year-old woman. That accusation has not been retracted. Investigators eventually recovered DNA from inside Nancy's home that does not belong to her or anyone in close contact with her. A separate DNA sample was found on a black glove recovered approximately 2 miles from the house. The FBI ran both samples through the federal criminal database. The search came back negative. Whoever left biological material inside Nancy Guthrie's home has never been arrested, never been convicted, never entered the criminal justice system. No prior record, a clean slate, the profile of someone living an ordinary life. Someone whose name would not raise any flags. Someone who could attend family dinners and drive elderly women home and sign documents and ask for loans that get turned down. Now here is what the investigation has not done. It has not released the 911 call. Annie Guthrie placed that call at 12:03 p.m. on February 1st. Arizona 911 recordings are public records. In most high-profile missing persons cases, the recording surfaces within days, sometimes hours. 3 months into this investigation, nobody outside of law enforcement has heard a single second of what Annie said when she called to report her mother was gone. A retired detective appearing on a national true crime program addressed this directly. He said there is probably investigative information on that recording that detectives do not want the public to hear. He said not to hold your breath waiting for it. And then he said the recording may not surface until a trial date is set. A trial date. Again. Now think about what might be on a recording that would justify keeping it sealed for this long. Annie's voice, the time of the call, the words she chose. How much did she volunteer before the dispatcher asked? Did she describe what she found inside the house? Did she mention the blood on the front porch? Did she say anything that a person arriving at a scene for the first time would not yet know? And then there is the 7-minute gap. The family arrived at Nancy's home at 11:56 a.m. The 911 call was placed at 12:03 p.m. 7 minutes between arriving at the home of a missing 84-year-old woman and picking up the phone. If blood was visible on the front porch within the first minute of arrival, and investigators confirmed it was in a location that would be difficult to miss, then 6 of those 7 minutes passed after someone saw evidence of a crime and before anyone called for help. What happened in those 6 minutes? Who was called first? What was moved? What was touched? What was said? The recording is the only piece of evidence that might answer that, and it is locked away because investigators decided the public cannot hear it yet. Annie's vehicle was seized by law enforcement. It was held for over 40 days of forensic examination. 40 days. Standard processing for a vehicle belonging to someone who has been publicly cleared does not take 40 days. 40 days is the timeline of a vehicle being examined for specific biological or physical evidence that investigators are looking for very carefully. Then photographs surfaced showing people at Nancy's residence loading boxes into vehicles. Annie's Honda CR-V was present in those images. Boxes were being carried out of the home. Nancy has not been declared dead. No death certificate exists. No probate process has been opened. No court has authorized anyone to remove personal belongings from the home of a woman whose disappearance is still classified as an active criminal investigation. And still, the boxes were moving. An independent reporter who had been documenting the case on the ground posted a question publicly. Someone plans to move into Nancy Guthrie's home. Who could it be? The response that got the most traction was simple. Someone who cannot pay their own property taxes. There is no official confirmation that anyone plans to occupy Nancy's home, but the boxes left. The vehicle was there repeatedly. And the question of who benefits from Nancy being gone has never been officially answered. Let me stack the full financial sequence one final time, beginning to end, because when you see it assembled as a single line, the picture is very difficult to look away from. May 2025. A power of attorney is signed giving Annie control over Tommaso's financial and property affairs. Legal experts say routine. The timing places it 8 months before the abduction. Sometime before January 31st, 2026. Annie reportedly asks Nancy for a loan. Nancy says no. That refusal, if verified, is the first documented moment of financial tension between the mother and the daughter who would be the last to see her. January 31st, 5:32 p.m. Nancy takes a documented Uber to Annie and Tommaso's house for dinner. January 31st, approximately 9:50 p.m. Tommaso drives Nancy home. Undocumented. No camera, no timestamp, no witness, only his account. 9:50 p.m. to 12:03 p.m. the following day, 14 hours and 13 minutes, no call, no text, no visit from the people who live 4 miles away. February 1st, 1:47 a.m. the doorbell camera is tampered with by a masked, armed, gloved individual carrying a backpack sold exclusively at Walmart. February 1st, 2:28 a.m. Nancy's pacemaker disconnects from her phone. She has been removed from her home. February 1st, 12:03 p.m. Annie calls 911. The recording has been sealed by investigators for 3 months. A retired detective says it will not be released until a trial date approaches. February through March. Annie's vehicle is seized and held for 40 days of forensic examination. April. Photographs surface showing boxes being removed from Nancy's home, while her disappearance is still an open criminal investigation. May. An independent reporter posts that someone appears to be planning to move into Nancy's house. Each item in that sequence has an innocent explanation. A power of attorney can be routine. A dinner is just a dinner. A ride home is a courtesy. A gap in phone calls is an oversight. Boxes can be moved for safekeeping. Every single piece has a version that means nothing on its own. But here is the problem. When every innocent explanation requires you to look away from the piece that came before it and pretend the sequence does not exist, the innocent explanations stop being the most likely ones. They become the ones you have to work hardest to believe. Nobody has been named a suspect. Nobody has been charged. The family has been publicly cleared by the sheriff. Savannah Guthrie has defended her sister and brother-in-law publicly and firmly. Former FBI agents have said Annie and Tommaso appeared to be on genuinely good terms with Nancy. I am not telling you who did this. I am doing what investigators do. I am following the documented evidence. And the documented evidence leads through a financial trail that begins with a daughter asking her mother for money, runs through an undocumented ride home on the last night Nancy was seen, passes through 14 hours of silence, a sealed 911 call, a vehicle held for 40 days, and boxes leaving a $1 million home before the law has declared its owner dead. NBC News has built a protocol specifically for this case. If a development breaks during a live broadcast, Savannah is removed from the set immediately. A different anchor covers the story on air. The information is delivered to Savannah privately. Networks do not build procedures like that for cases they believe are going cold. They build them for cases where they expect a moment, an arrest, a body, an identification, something that will land in real time. The preparation means NBC believes this case is heading somewhere. The DNA is at the FBI. The 911 call is sealed. The vehicle has been examined for 40 days. A retired detective is using the word trial. A county official publicly accused the sheriff of letting a personal grudge interfere with a federal investigation. And somewhere, in a laboratory or a legal filing or a conversation that has not yet become public, the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie exists. She is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker and needs medication every night. She has been gone for over 3 months. And the last person to see her alive is the son-in-law of the daughter who reportedly asked for money and was told no. That is where the evidence leads right now. If you have watched this far, drop a comment and tell me what you think the 911 call contains. Because a retired detective with decades of experience believes it is being held specifically for a future prosecution. And whatever is on that recording is the piece of this case that nobody has heard yet. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Because when this case breaks, and it will break, you are going to want to be here.